Brynhawn da a chroeso i gyfarfod Pwyllgor Craffu Addysg Sgiliau a Lles a ddydd Mercher y 25 o Ionawr 2023. Good afternoon and welcome to this hybrid meeting of Education Skills and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee on the 25th of January 2023. I am Councillor Rebecca Phillips and I will be chairing this meeting. Just to make everyone aware, the meeting will be recorded. Please can you ensure that your phones are switched to silent for the duration of the meeting and that your microphones are muted when not speaking. If members wish to speak or ask a question, please could you raise your electronic hands or physical hand in the council chamber. Also, for those in the chamber, please use your microphone when speaking. For the purpose of the next agenda item, which is declarations of interest, I can confirm that we have chosen to scrutinise all the Cabinet Board agenda items. We will also be discussing the report contained within our scrutiny agenda, which is the consultation on the 2023-2024 budget proposals. I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome councillors that are joining us from other committees today. Croeso. So moving on with the agenda item 2, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from members today based on the items we have chosen to scrutinise, please? Councillor
Yes.
Wayne Carpenter, please.
Just to declare I'm a member of the SACRA group.
Diolch yn fawr. Councillor Sonia Reynolds, please.
To declare an interest in item 14, the supplementary for our own on-flying start, as a chair of an organisation that's one of the providers in one of the areas mentioned. Thank you.
Lovely, diolch. Councillor Rydian Maisen, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare that I'm on the SACRA committee also.
Lovely. Councillor Jeff Jones, please.
Yes, I'm also on the SACRA committee.
Diolch. Councillor Dave Whitelock, please.
Yes, I'm also on the SACRA committee, Chair. Declare personal interest.
Diolch. Councillor Peter Rees, please.
Likewise, Chair, I'm also on the SACRA committee.
Diolch yn fawr. I see no other interest to declare. Sarah will forward an electronic version of the form for you to complete and email back to her. Diolch yn fawr. Moving on to agenda item 3, consultation on the 2023 budget proposals. Just to remind you that you will see the whole report in front of you, but I'm asking you to scrutinise only those relating to this committee's portfolio. This is also your chance as members to discuss any income generation suggestions or saving opportunities you would like to put forward. We have discussed this item in pre-scrutiny and I'd like to call up Peter Rees to ask a question, please. Diolch, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the funding of our schools, and I agree that the intention was to focus on the COVID recovery, but if the specific issue is that not fully funding the 2022-23 pay award for school staff, that schools are going to suffer if that pay award for 23-24 is not fully funded, and it means that schools will suffer. I know in my own 2 schools where I'm chair of governors, if that is the case, then those schools, their budgets will be devastated. And I just wondered what the comments are, Chair.
Hugh, do you want to go first and I'll come in? Yep. So in terms of the funding of schools for this year, 22-23, obviously that's not part of the proposals, and I believe we've covered those off previously, as I've said in the past. Unfortunately, because the Welsh Government haven't funded us sufficiently for those pay awards, we don't have the funding to passport over to schools for 22-23. What we have done in terms of the 23-24 budget is to make good the fact that we didn't have that funding this year, so schools will be fully funded from the 1st of April. And the budget proposals include an increase in school funding of 8.6% for next year, which is over and above the 7.1% that the council received in the settlement. So hopefully, Chair, that's good news for schools that they'll be receiving funding over and above what was in the council's settlement. So thank you, Chair. Andrew may want to add something.
Yeah, I do. I certainly wouldn't disagree with anything that Hugh's just said, Peter, but quite clearly in year, we uplifted school budgets by 4%, and the teachers' pay rise alone was 5%, and support staff in some cases was as much as 10%. So you're right, there's a deficit in year which schools have had to fund from their reserves. Those reserves were built up through COVID, in the main funded by Welsh Government in terms of recovery. So quite clearly, some of their plans of, the fact that they've got to make good the difference between the 4% and the costs that they're having to incur will make a dent in their recovery plans. So you're right to raise the question going forward, but as Hugh quite rightly said, we've given schools everything that we had from Welsh Government. There is in a later report to do with COVID recovery mention of school reserves, and I'll highlight this now so that we can have a discussion. I think schools started the year with £12 million in reserves at the end of March last year. Halfway through the year, that was schools recovery planning, said that they were going to spend £8 million of that 12 million, leaving 4 million. The result of not fully funding the pay award in year means that school reserves across all three sectors, special, primary and secondary, and all through schools, obviously, school reserves at the moment are anticipated to be £2 million. So the vast majority of school reserves are predicted to be used in year. So, who quite rightly has built into the budget going forward, fully funding the pay award. Of course, I've spent most of the last week planning for next week's strike action. So we don't know what's going to come from that industrial action. So the costs may rise more than we think. So, you're right to raise the question around the risks and that funding being used for recovery and potentially it not being available if the pay award is above what we fund schools. So we'll have to keep an eye on that going forward.
Chair, can I come back, Chair?
Yes, Peter.
Just the fact that schools with COVID and the mental health problems that schools have experiencing with children and staff, it means that if the schools find themselves in a deficit position, obviously the staff that they've taken on during this year to try to protect those children will have to be made redundant, and that's the question. That's the problem that we've got. And if that is the case, then we will not be doing a service to our children and our schools. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Whitelock, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got a query on the home to school transport. I can see for this forthcoming year, there's a 9% increase built in. Two questions really. Is there any contingency if it goes way above that, which the way everything's going at the moment is quite possible? And for the future 4 years, it seems to, I know we're all hoping inflation is going to drop quite dramatically, but are them figures really reflective of what we think is going to happen, or are we going to find ourselves looking for money for school transport?
Yeah, no problem. So you're quite right. We've built in a 9% inflationary increase for next year. We've also built in an unavoidable budget pressure, which is on page 23. No, it's not. Sorry, apologies. It's there. Sorry, page 22 of the report. There's an additional 1.276 built in for school transport for next year. And as you correctly say, Councillor Whitelock, we are hoping inflation will reduce in subsequent years, which will mean we only have to increase contracts by 5%. Obviously, the purpose of having a 5-year plan, which is updated annually, is that we will, when we sort of reiterate when we do the next iteration of the plan next year, we will be revising those assumptions. And if inflation is still high, then obviously we will have to then factor that into our planning going forward. So, but no, there's no contingency as such. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Can I just come in? I suppose the contingency part of it is we've engaged some consultants to do a scoping exercise around the whole of our transport within the council. They've given us a proposal. Because of the fact that we've presented a balanced budget, albeit with some risks within it, we don't feel the need to take that forward in terms of financial year 23-24, but we will be looking at it in depth with the view to hopefully driving some costs out of home to school transport budget in particular, but also transport costs across the council. And the other hope is, as Hugh said, that the current rates of inflation don't continue at the rates that they're currently at. So there's two things we're doing. Hugh just mentioned what we're doing within our financial planning and being able to adapt as we go forward in terms of plans. But also, we need to review what we're doing, because one of the ways to reduce our costs is to reduce demand on the system. And just to give you an example of the sort of things we're looking at, and there's no detail around this yet, travel training for young people. We've done it in the past. It's been very successful. It is all to do with young people transitioning into adulthood. It's about making them independent. Plus, it has the benefit of reducing our transport costs going forward. So those are the sorts of things we're looking at.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Hugh. Moving on, Councillor Matthew Crowley, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question is based pretty much around what Peter had to say and with Dave. In regards to Peter's question and Andrew's response, obviously we're talking about £12 million reserves across all the school sectors, but as we know, some schools are nearly on the brink of bankruptcy, and other schools got huge reserves. So although the £12 million figure sounds a huge figure, it depends what school you're in and what you're looking at that time. So that's going to be difficult enough. And included on top of that, later in the report, we're looking at a former area of mine in school cleaning. And of course, we're looking to take that cost away, and schools will have to pay more. So for us who are governors, excuse me, it's a double whammy. In terms of what Andrew just explained and Dave's question around school transport, that was another former area of mine in a previous life. It is demand-led. That's what's difficult about it. I mean, we can do scoping exercises, and Andrew have said, and some of the newer schemes that have come in have been a success. However, the biggest problem isn't always about money. It's about getting the providers to provide the service. When I run school transport, it was like a cartel out there. You couldn't get, we had the money then to throw at it, dare I say, but the biggest problem was getting the provider to do the school transport. So the observations, Chair, I'm pretty much happy with the response that have come across. If any of the officers want to add to it, I'd be grateful. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Matthew. On the last person who would want to put any additional costs on schools, but just in terms of the school clean and the proposal within the draft budget around that, we've been here before, and I suppose in the end we took the position that the local authority can't afford to subsidise school cleaning. And I think you do have to sort of look at that one against the backdrop. I think you said schools' budgets are increasing by 8.1%. 8.6%, beg your pardon. So whilst it saddens me on one level to put those costs on schools, we have to balance that against the overall uplift of 8.6% in terms of school budgets. It doesn't matter what other authorities are doing, to be honest. We need to focus on Neath and Talbot, but I'm sure you have heard of other authorities and what their plans are for schools. This overall, in my opinion, represents a good budget, good settlement for schools. It can always be better. We could not be suggesting imposing £162,000 on primary schools, but we've got to balance the budget and we've got to look at these things in the round. So whilst I agree with you, Matthew, we've to protect jobs and protect services, that's the proposal that we're consulting on.
Diolch, Andrew. Councillor Sonia Reynolds, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you. Interesting answers so far. I would just say, though, 8.6% increase, inflation at 10%. So, there is a real disparity there. And I know that's across the board in everything, but it does raise questions about issues with school budgets and the fact that this is a real term cut by the looks of it to school budgets. And we talk about savings, but they're cuts. And that's something we've said all the way through, and I've been involved in saying for the last 5 years. So, they're not savings, they're cuts. If we look at, first off, how many schools are likely to be put in deficit in terms of the changes that are making, how do we know? And we did ask this at the budget discussion, whether there was a list we could see, the update on school reserves and whether there was likely to be schools who were going to go into a deficit position.
I don't think any school is, I don't think these proposals are going to put any school in deficit. There are schools in deficit, and clearly, Matthew made the point earlier, didn't he, that the £12 million is an aggregate figure, and there's a lot of detail sort of within that overall figure. The truth is there will still be schools with significant reserve levels, and there'll be schools with significant deficit positions. And the significant deficit positions, there's a story behind that. So I don't think this this budget is going to put any school into deficit, because I don't think the proposals are so significant. The big costs in schools, staffing, for instance, who's already said we're fully funding staffing costs next year. There's a significant risk around energy. That if we're proposing to put 50% into school budgets next year in terms of energy, and one of the suggestions is that energy costs could rise by as much as 162%. Now, if energy costs rise 162% and we put 50% in and we don't do anything about that going forward in terms of when we refine our planning, that fact could put schools into deficit without a doubt. That's a significant risk. But outside of that, the other big cost the schools have, which is staffing, and we're proposing to fund those increases fully. Peter was right earlier, because if schools have spent the best part of £8 million in year funding recovery, then quite clearly they can't carry on spending another £8 million on recovery, because do the maths, that's 16 million and there's only 12 million to start with. So some of that recovery work will have to stop, and Peter referred to those people will have to be let go. But the vast majority of those are on temporary contracts. I don't say that lightly, because they're still people with families and mortgages. But I don't think this budget is going to tip any school into a deficit. If they're in deficit, they'll probably stay in deficit. It won't get them out of a deficit. But we've got very few schools now in a deficit because of all the reserves that they've built up over the last few years. But there are some risks within this budget, quite clearly.
Thank you, Andrew. There's a likelihood, however, as you say, that some schools who are in deficit, things like the cleaning cost, is there a likelihood that they'll cut back on the cleaning, given that we've got Strep A to deal with, and COVID's still around, and we know that cleaning was a huge requirement, and that keeping things clean is a key element. Is there a likelihood that some schools will seek to cut back?
Obviously, they'll look to see where they can cut back. I doubt very much whether schools would take the decision to move away from the council's school cleaning service, simply because if through COVID, the support they provided schools was unbelievable. But of course, schools have got to balance their budgets. So it's about prioritising. So in all likelihood, they probably will ask the school cleaning manager to maybe reduce the spec or whatever, but they've got to clean their schools. I don't see them going outside because of the service they get. And, if they'd had an independent cleaning service during COVID, I do fear for the school in those circumstances. So I don't think that would happen. So schools then have to prioritise, and it may be other services that schools buy in would be the sort of the victim, if you like. But when schools balance their budgets, they have to look at all their costs and they have to make decisions. And I don't see schools, I could be wrong, but I don't see schools making changes to their current arrangements. But that doesn't mean there won't be consequences if that proposal is brought in.
Thank you. As a governor, as I know a number of people are on this committee, then we'll know that we've all got to be involved in those decisions, and it's extremely difficult in some cases to balance school budgets, make sure the staffing and the cleaning contracts, which I've been involved in discussions around in previous years, are right. I think most of my next questions move over to the finance end, although might need some help in. So Hugh gets a few. I wondered if Hugh, perhaps together with Andrew, you could run us through the reserves table in relation to education. We've got specific reserves for a number of things listed, and I just wanted to know, what the proposals were for why they were there, and what some of those can be used for. Because I note, for example, that there's an additional learning needs reserve, yet we're talking about putting council tax up in order to meet additional learning needs. So, what's the link? What am I missing? I'm not a financial whiz.
I don't think you're missing anything, Councillor Reynolds. Obviously, there's £1 million in an additional learning needs reserve, which is a one-off sum of money. The funding that's going into the budget is to provide plan places on a recurring basis, so we could potentially use that reserve. But once, as you know, I've said it 1,000 times, once it's gone, it's gone. So the proposal is to put permanent funding in the school's budget to make sure those plan places are there on an ongoing basis. I don't know if Andrew has any specific plans around that ALN reserve that aren't factored in here, because these are obviously the commitments that we know about to date, but I'm assuming that Andrew may have something to say around that. The second reserve is the Education Equalisation Reserve. As you can see, there's £2.4 million at the start of the year, with a commitment of the best part of £600,000 to deliver some initiatives over the next couple of years. And again, by its very nature, as an equalisation reserve, it is there to fund peaks and troughs in terms of the education budget, and each director will have an equalisation reserve of their own, which it's their responsibility to manage. And the third reserve is a home to school transport reserve, which is being completely wiped out in this financial year to cover the increased costs. So, Andrew, whether you want to say some more words around those reserves?
Yes, certainly in terms of the ALN reserve, these reserves have been built up over a period of time, and some of them are just simply fortuitous. One of the reasons there's so much money in the ALN reserve is because as part of ALN, the ALNET Act, Welsh Government have given local authorities funding, which meant, and in fairness, they've given us grants at the end of the year, which the only possible way that you can meet the grant conditions is to offset costs that you've currently spent in year, and then so you make a saving, and then you put the grant into a reserve. So they've been built up, and it's gone into what is described as an ALN reserve. There are certainly plans to spend that money, as you can imagine. Like a colleague on the left-hand side does not have a problem spending money, and it's all to do with the implementation. It's the ongoing implementation of the ALNET Act. A lot of that money will be spent on releasing staff in schools, so a lot of that money will be going into schools so that they come out, we can cover the cost of those members of staff while they're doing the training. So again, schools aren't bearing the cost of that training. We cover the cost of these people coming out, and obviously it covers the cost of the training as well. So whilst there's a tag to it, some of the reason that tag is on it is just simply because of the way the reserve was created by grants coming in through that. For many years, we went in education with very, very low reserves, and the only reason we got a couple of £1 million now is because of the grants that have come in on ALNET and COVID. So yeah, and I think Chair, I think Hayley might want to add something. Is that okay?
Hayley? Thank you. Yeah, just to say as well, we are still going through the implementation period. We're taking on additional responsibilities. Oh, I thought it was on.
No, I want you speak into it though.
Early years and post-16. So the post-16 implementation hasn't happened yet. So we don't really know what that's going to look like. We don't know whether we're going to get any additional funding for that, and that will put additional pressure on as well. But obviously happy to keep you updated as we move through the implementation period. But as Andrew said, we've had the grants, but the grants alone aren't going to get us through the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley. Are you happy with that, Councillor Reynolds?
Much useful answer, but and I'm assuming that as reserves are required to be brought out, that will be an issue for council year on year, or during the year. Yeah.
Any transfer from reserves will be part of the budget monitoring exercise, which is reported on in our directorates.
Right, 2.8 million. And I understand other committees have looked at this as well. There's very little information about this 2.8 million for renewables, and now it appears energy efficiency, etc. And I'm wondering how much of that, or whether there's the possibility that our schools can, look to that. Many of them have asked, and we've had proposals from third sector organisations or from co-ops offering panels for schools, and we've not taken that up in terms of solar panels. And I'm wondering whether that would be an opportunity for schools to help reduce energy bills.
The answer to that is yes. There's not a great amount of detail. As I mentioned, I think in Scrutiny last week, these are draft proposals. What we've done is recognise, as Andrew said, there's a risk around energy. We've only included funding of 50% within budget, so we've allocated £2.8 million for this Renewable Energy Transition Fund. If the proposals are approved, they find their way to Cabinet and Council and get approved, we will draw up a scheme. And yes, there will definitely be the possibility for schools to access, because that's one of the issues that's been raised with me when we've done the pre-consultation engagement with head teachers is, well, if you want me to become more energy efficient, you need to provide us with funding to enable us to actually install panels, etc., to be able to lower our costs. Obviously, previously, the business cases around these may not have stacked up because energy prices would have been lower than they are now, but with the high proposed prices, more business cases in terms of these investments will stack up. So that 2.8 million, which is proposed to be in the base budget as a recurring 2.8 million, will allow schools and other council buildings to become more move towards renewable energy. You'll have heard Nicola talk about the requirement to move to net zero by 2030. So again, this is part of that initiative, in the fact that we only have, prior to these proposals, £2 million in a ring-fenced reserve. We'll obviously be looking for Welsh Government to fund some of these as well, because it's their policy. But the purpose is, if approved, that we have £2.8 million in the base to be able to fund these sorts of initiatives. So a long way to say yes, Councillor Reynolds.
Yes, Andrew.
Yeah. Two of the three big consumers of energy in the council is leisure and schools. Yeah. So what I'll be looking for from this funding is for somebody with the expertise to come in, review our current usage, review the school estate, the leisure estate, come up with suggestions, because undoubtedly, to be fair to the schools, they can't do this alone. Anything else, they don't own the buildings. We own the buildings. We're the landlord, so they shouldn't be, putting solar panels on their roofs without consultation with ourselves. And I use solar panels as just an example. So hopefully we will get some investment proposals which will show some sort of return, because one of the things about energy is we can't continue to either pay the rates which are being charged at the moment, or continue to use as much energy. Those are the only two ways to reduce your energy costs, is to stop using as much or buy it in or deliver it cheaper. So what I'm hoping from this investment fund essentially is that our school estate and our leisure estate will take advantage of whoever comes in, an expert, consultant, and just tells us what sort of investment we need, what the rates of return are, to drive down our costs sustainably. And of course, use less energy, which will be good for the planet as well. So that's what I want to see from this 2.8 million. And it'll probably be a lot more than that, actually, when the business cases come in.
Sorry, I should have mentioned as well, Chair, whilst this is £2.8 million of the revenue funding, what it does allow us to do, if the business cases stack up, is actually convert some of the revenue funding into repaying of borrowing costs. So if there's capital investment required, we can take some of the 2.8 and say, well, we'll use that to fund the borrowing costs on capital over X number of years. So it actually will give itself sort of a gearing and a leverage ratio if that's the way we propose to go. So thank you. Just wanted to add that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
But as I picked up, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, Hugh, it could be, because there are risks in the energy situation, that this ends up being used to cover deficits and cover increased costs.
Hopefully not. Hopefully we will be able to manage sort of temporary deficits through other reserves, and we can actually use this for delivering on the net zero agenda as well. Otherwise it just becomes a £2.8 million contingency for increased costs and doesn't actually give that scope to invest in making things more renewable. So the intention is that it is used for making things more renewable through, as I say, could be borrowing, not just an energy contingency in effect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hugh, and Andrew, really useful. My last point was about leisure services, and there's a crossover with the paper later in the agenda, but this is a matter for sort of wider discussion, I think. So with the Chair's indulgence, I'll raise them here and sort of regard them as meet for any discussion further on. And that's the general lack of information made in relation to financial information on the leisure services. The original decision was for a business plan to be prepared by October, November 2022. That didn't happen. Now we see that we're delaying bringing it in by 1 year, and that will save 1 million, but there's no detail around that. If this is to me, this is an increased figure in relation to the business rates. In my memory, it was a different figure to that in the documentation that came before when we made the decision. And there was always a lack of information. If people remember back, it was very much one of the concerns that was raised by the Scrutiny Committee at that time and caused some consternation over the discussions there. However, I do believe, and I understand there may be privacy issues. I really do understand there may be privacy issues in this, and therefore I don't expect information to be brought forward at the immediate time. However, I do believe that members of this committee need more information in terms of the finances behind these decisions. And I would like to see those prior to consideration and the final views on the budget, and how we can get those supplied to members so that they can contribute their views in a proper manner.
It's not true that the business plan didn't happen. Business plan was together, and the costs which are captured in the medium-term financial plan are the ones that are reflected in the business plan. So that's where they've come from. It is true that members haven't seen the business plan, so there's no argument about that. So we've got agreement. Just the agreement is on the fact you haven't seen those figures. Just to explain the £1 million sort of in terms of the leisure, and as you say, that report's coming up later. That's simply to do with the cost of rates and the pension costs. I'm sure you understand the £1 million. But the business plan that was put together, the costs of running the service are reflected within the medium-term financial plan. So, but admittedly, happy to bring that business plan to members. Happy to circulate it before the end of the consultation on the budget. Yeah, no issues at all. So when this comes back, at least then you'll have seen the detail.
That would be very helpful. Thank you, Andrew.
Oh, thank you for that, Andrew. Councillor Matthew Crowley, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have a supplementary question based on Andrew's answers regarding the spend of the 2.4 million. I'm lucky in my area, one of my schools has got solar panels, which I'm chair of, as a new build. And one of the other schools hasn't, and I instructed the head teacher to look into it to see what the cost effectiveness was of solar panel energy on our school roofs. But as Andrew quite rightly says, it's They don't own the schools, the council does. And of course, I just want Andrew's assurances if that we're going to spend this 2.4 million on the solar panels, which will be great news for the schools. It will reduce energy and it will fall in line with what Hugh just said. Then will it be fully funded from within the education budget or the 2.4 million that you alluded to? If that is the case, that's fine, but that 2.4 million won't stretch far over 60 schools. So how will you decide on a rollout scheme if that's the way we're going to spend it? I'd be interested to hear that sort of detail at some point. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Hugh.
Thank you, Councillor Crowley. Well, as I mentioned, the detail isn't there yet. If these proposals are approved, then we will come back to Cabinet with a scheme which will detail how schools and other facilities can access the funding and the criteria, etc. So hopefully, if Council are minded to approve these proposals as they stand in March, we'll be able to come back shortly after that with a scheme, and hopefully that will allow over the summer, when obviously energy consumption is less, for us to be able to deliver those schemes in time for the winter. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, members and officers. If I could bring Councillor Jeremy Hurley in at this point, please. Diolch.
Yeah, only some additional information. So I met with Simon Brennan last week on where we go in rolling these schemes out, and obviously it's quite complicated. So they're doing a full assessment of all the buildings because there's external factors like age of roofs, how long the building's going to be there, the future of the building, the infrastructure with the sort of electrical systems. So they're doing a full assessment first, and then it'll be rolled out on perhaps the quickest return or the most benefit we can get out of each scheme. So it is in progress, so they are working on it. And I'll keep you updated. I'm going to sort of keep an eye on it as a project as well, so I'll try and update as much as I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Oh, Councillor Reynolds, final question, please.
Thank you for that, Cabinet Member. And we're also, what I'd like to ask in that case is if anybody has discussed using a cooperative scheme such as EGNI that would, and I declare an interest on that, being a member of that, a minor level, but it's a community cooperative that does put free panels on roofs and of community organisations and buildings, and has done schools in other authorities, and I believe schools in our authority. But we haven't seemed to link in that well.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. To be honest, I spoke to Dan McCallum back more or less when I first got in, because I'd gone up to visit the hub and whatever, and I think it was brought up in one of the budget consultations when they visited up, I think in your ward, that it was brought to their attention, and we've spoken to Dan. And again, Simon Brennan is going to go back, take a look at whatever's going on, and then we're going to meet with Dan as well to discuss with him as well. So it is in progress. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, members and officers, for your contributions on that. That report was only for information purposes, believe it or not, but it does obviously need to be scrutinised, and the consultation is open till the 10th of February, and I'm sure we'll have some more interesting discussions on that matter. Moving on with the agenda item 4, post-COVID update. Hayley Lurview, would you like to provide us the information? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Members remember we brought a verbal report before Christmas and requested a written report from us. As you can see, we have a number of officers here today because the report covers a range of services, and we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Any members have any questions on this matter? Councillor Caroline Lewis, did you want to come in?
Oh, hi everyone. Yes, I just wanted to just say I was really pleased to see that there was an educational psychologist assistant appointed recently. I'm sure that'll have a really positive effect on the families and children post-COVID. And my other question for you, regarding you've appointed an educational psychologist, do you have any plans to appoint speech and language therapy assistants throughout the authority? I know that other authorities have a huge bank of them and have done for many years. We all know that a lot of behaviour and understanding is down to lack of, you know, effective communication and language skills. So I'm just wondering if, as you've appointed an assistant to your psychologists, would you look at appointing assistants to your speech therapist and other professionals within the authority?
Okay, thank you for that. As it happens, we already have looked at that quite carefully and absolutely agree with you. The connection between speech, language and communication and behaviour is key. So we have a really good commissioned service with health around commissioning speech and language therapists. So that's working well and we review that regularly. We also have within our advisory team staff, not just working within the speech and language service themselves, but who are skilled and have qualification and experience in other areas. So for instance, we have within the ASD advisory service, we have within the early years sector. So we recognise as a service that it's about all staff being skilled in understanding the importance of speech, language and communication, particularly, you know, it's always been something that we've prioritised, but particularly now with our little ones coming out of, say, post-COVID, but certainly when they've been isolated, they haven't had the experiences or the interactions. So we are looking at also at what is coming our way there in terms of supporting those very early on. We've got Zoe Ashton as the coordinator for inclusion. I don't know, Zoe, if you want to add anything to what I've just said, but it's a key priority for us, speech, language and communication. So I agree with everything you've said.
Oh, thank you. No, that's it. No, that's absolutely fine. It's just I just asked the question, you see, knowing what other authorities do, you just can't help but ask. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, did you want to come in? Have you got anything to add?
Nothing to add, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Peter Rees, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. On this COVID recovery, one of the problems we've had, of course, has been a great increase in those children who found it difficult to transition back into school following being out of school during the lockdown. This again is connected with the budget, obviously. If the budget is not going to meet, what's going to happen to these children whose schools are struggling at the moment to find resources to accommodate these children who are having these difficulties? It's all as a result of the COVID and the transition back into, and you will know, Hayley, that there has been a real increase in the number of children with these difficulties and mental health problems.
Thank you, Councillor Rees. No, absolutely agree with your point, Chair. We are seeing an increase in children sort of for emotional and mental health reasons, who are reluctant perhaps to turn to school, who are struggling in school at the moment. So we have a number of things, and I will bring Zoe in on this because she can talk a little bit about the assistant educator psychologist that we've appointed through grant funding. So we're using grant funding at the moment to appoint a number, and you'll probably see that in the body of the report and with the appendices as well in terms of what we're doing there. We're also working with schools on a number of models. So we have a trauma-informed approach to schools as well. So we're working closely with schools on that. The other thing we've got then is in terms of mental health and working in collaboration closely with health. So our principal education psychologist is leading the work on that for us. So we've got quite a lot of work going on because obviously we recognise that this is a big issue for our children and young people at the moment. And perhaps I can pass over to Zoe just to talk about those roles a little bit more, if that would be helpful. Is that okay?
Yeah, no problem. Completely agree, Councillor Rees, in terms of what you've highlighted there, and I think that this is something which has been acknowledged across Wales. I think we are very fortunate in Neath Talbot that we have been able to invest significantly in this area through the use of grant money. And I think some of the roles that we currently have in place are very innovative, actually, and something to be very proud of, I think, as an authority. So we we have appointed 2 assistant educational psychologists. One is for emotional-based school avoidance, so the terminology around those pupils that had difficulty re-engaging post-COVID, in particular, are these young people, young people who, through anxiety, through social phobia, which was exacerbated through the pandemic, obviously had difficulty returning to school, and which is ultimately impacting on school attendance. So we've currently got an assistant EP in place, and they're responsible for working with those young people and trying to re-engage them back into education. So they've currently got a caseload of about 10 young people at present. So we made a conscious decision not to overwhelm in terms of the case numbers of young people that they're able to deal with, because obviously we want to show maximum impact. So they are working with them to re-engage them back into schools, working with families, trying to connect with them on a face-to-face basis and to work with them through their anxieties. Running alongside that, we've also been fortunate for a number of years now, I look to my colleague Kerry there, to have appointed almost like a community counsellor who has been working for a number of years now with those children and young people who, again, have disengaged from school. So where they present with significant anxiety difficulties, which may then be preventing them accessing everyday school. That legacy counsellor has been working with children and young people to try and, again, re-engage them, and we've had success there as well. And we've also appointed an assistant educational psychologist for electively home-educated children. So I guess what we noticed post-COVID was there was an increase in the number of children and young people whose parents opted for them to be electively home-educated. So, and again, I think understanding the rationale and the reasoning behind that increase, it was observed that, anxiety was a factor, contributing factor. So again, we've appointed an assistant psychologist who works closely with our education welfare service, who will undertake home visits, who will work with that young person at home, and will again ultimately aim to try and get them, when they're ready, to re-engage back into education. So there's a lot of positive work going on in acknowledgement of some of the issues that you've highlighted there.
Thank you, Zoe. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Peter, you're quite right when you talk about the increased demand. I'm not going to do this one. I'm not going to do this one. Increased demand in schools. Myself and Andrew Jarrett briefed Cabinet just before Christmas on, Andrew expressed the demand that he's seeing in terms of, at the front door, in terms of children's services. And of course, quite clearly, they're the same young people, the same families that our schools are having to deal with. The hope is that, and quite clearly, this is a legacy of COVID. And the hope is that if we can do something over the next maybe 2 years, to work and support, and Hayley and Zoe have spoken about some of that support. That's certainly not an exhaustive sort of account of the support that we offer schools for these families and these young people. But Andrew Jarrett and I are hopefully bringing forward a report to members in the very near future about some specific investment to support schools, but in the main, the children and the families of the young people who have suffered the most from COVID legacy. We hope to bring something forward, a 2-year programme where we provide specific support over and above the funding that is in schools currently, Peter, maybe continuing to fund the staff that are in schools now. Currently, we've already secured funding for Cynydd, and they're part of the support programme going forward for these young people. But of course, they're only sort of one member of staff in each school. And if we are successful, we'll be bringing forward a report which talks about funding it from reserves. So Sonia spoke about reserves earlier. That will be a suggestion for members to support through that. So it's been put together by officers of education in conjunction with schools, in conjunction with children and young, social services, children's services, which represents the best way that we think we can impact on those families which have been impacted most significantly post-COVID or during COVID. And as I said, we bring forward a report asking for members to support that in the very near future. And hopefully, if we can bear down on those children and those families, we can get back to something like pre-pandemic demand levels, which, whilst were very difficult to manage, we certainly were managing. They weren't as bad as the problems we're experiencing in our schools and in our families, in some families currently. So there may be some other investment, Peter, for schools, for young people and their families coming forward if members support that.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really reassuring to hear, actually. Are there any other members that want to ask any questions on this item? Councillor Sonia Reynolds, please.
I just wanted to say, really good extra answers, but just to congratulate all the staff and thank them all for coming, because it was an informative report and very useful. And thanks for the effort put in. Yeah, I do have concerns about the additional people moving into homeschooling and whether or not that's meeting needs, and the issues of what, the lack of recording and the lack of ability to do anything about that. But that's for another topic at another time.
Thank you for that, Councillor Reynolds. Hayley, I've just got a question, if that's okay. In terms of the COVID-19 Forward Action Plan, I'm assuming that's an ongoing document. I'm just wondering, how is it being reviewed and monitored, and whether it'll be coming back to this committee on a regular basis? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously we'll be reviewing all of this. It's all part of our core work streams now, really, and happy to bring an update on the work and the progress to members at a later date.
That's great, thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Okay, the information again is just for information purposes, so we'll note that report also. To move on with the agenda item 5, pre-decision scrutiny. We have decided to scrutinise all the items on the Cabinet Board agenda. So moving on with the Cabinet Board agenda, item number 7, participation and engagement strategy. Hayley, I believe this is you again. Thank you.
Me again. Yes. Thank you. Again, I'm sure members will remember just before Christmas or earlier on, we brought a paper on permission to consult on the children and young people's participation and engagement strategy. So Liz Dennis is with me today. Liz has been seconded as manager of the Wellbeing and Behaviour team, along with other pieces of work, to concentrate on this piece of work for us. The consultation has gone far and wide, so involved a lot of stakeholders, and most importantly, the children and people themselves, who have given some excellent advice and responses to us, and happy to take any questions and then request that we adopt it so that we can begin implementing the strategy. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Hayley. Do any members have any questions on this item? Nothing? Okay.
Just say something then.
Yeah, of course.
There's no questions. This piece of work is really important for us. I mean, it kind of goes without saying, isn't it? Everything we do in my directorate impacts one way or other on children, young people, and involving them and including them in decision making. And that's proper involvement, not at the end of it, through the development of it, is really, really important. So delighted with this piece of work, and I thank my staff for it.
Thank you, and just to echo those words as well, Andrew. So we can see the recommendation to adopt this. Do we have any? Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Reynolds, thank you, and a seconder, please.
Happy to second, Chair.
I'll second it, Chair.
Councillor Henton, thank you. And do we have anyone against? Any abstentions? No, that's great. Thank you very much, members. Thank you. Oh yeah, just to confirm that this is for immediate implementation as well, isn't it? So just to confirm that. Thank you very much. Thank you, members. Yeah, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm that the report and the recommendation is supported to Cabinet Board.
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 8, the agreed syllabus for religion, values and ethics in Neath Talbot schools. And Mike Daly, please.
Thank you, Chair. We're bringing forward the agreed syllabus for religion, values and ethics. This is required. Agreement is required from yourselves, please, and approval that we take this forward. We provided the report and we're happy to answer any questions. As many of you have already identified, you already sit on the SACRA group. So many of the members here will already know about this, but we're happy to take any further questions.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions on this item? No indications. Okay. Thank you very much. So you'll see the recommendations on page 42 of the Cabinet Board agenda plaque. Please, can I have a proposer and a seconder for this, please?
Happy to propose, Chair.
Councillor Henton propose. Thank you.
I'll second, Chair.
Councillor Whitelock, thank you very much. Can members please indicate if they wish to abstain? Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it that this decision is supported to Cabinet Board.
I can confirm, Chair, the decision is supported to Cabinet Board.
Thank you very much, members. Item 9, School Improvement Team School Visits. Mike Daly again, please.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is a report for information on the support visits carried out by the school improvement team in Neath Talbot schools during the autumn term, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions that members have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions on this item? Councillor Matthew Crowley, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mike, for the report. I just wanted to know, I couldn't quite pick it up in the report. Obviously, the amount of visits across all the schools is great. I just wanted to know, are there any of those schools in the process of special measures or in special measures? I know that you're doing the visits, but just an outturn to tell us. Do we need to know the school names, Mike? But just need to know the stats around it. Thanks.
Yeah, that's no problem, Councillor. There are no schools in Neath Talbot in special measures. There are no schools in need of significant improvement. So that would be decided by Eston inspections. We don't have any schools in a formal category at all in Neath Talbot.
If I could, Chair, with your indulgence, if I could come back and thank all the schools for all their effort in ensuring that we're in this situation, and of course for Mike and his team who will undertake thorough investigations on our behalf as members. And it's absolutely wonderful that we are in the situation we are in Neath Talbot. It's testament to the input and the funding that we put in place to ensure that that is the case. So big thank you to Mike and his team, and a big thank you to our schools and all their teachers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crowley. Any other questions from members? I don't see any, and the report is just a monitoring report. So we note that report and thank officers for their time on this. Diolch yn fawr. Moving on to item 10, employability and skills update. And Angeline Spooner-Cleverley, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is our update with regard to employability skills and food poverty, which is under my portfolio. The report is for information only. Kerry Jones is here, who looks after all of the programmes, and we're here to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you. One specific, which is just to clarify my understanding around a particular section. I'll start off by saying, had a great deal of linkage with the programmes and the benefits they've had for people. So I think it's, just wanted to say they're all great. It's got to be a very complex area. The specific is, though, Communities for Work is ending. That's the ESF funded programme, etc. So European funding gone, etc. Communities for Work Plus has developed a youth guarantee element. So it's spread itself to cover the whole program, and that will replace both those programmes. I mean, that seemed to be what the report implied. Is that the case?
So Communities for Work Plus, it will incorporate the Young Persons Guaranteed as from the 1st of April. So Communities for Work Plus will be the new Welsh Government funded programme.
But it covers all age groups.
All age group from 16 plus.
So that was it has that spread across. Thank you.
Okay.
The other is, it has become a very complex picture. So trying to work your way through where to refer or who to talk to or what to do, for a counsellor is hard, for individuals is harder. I believe, having had a quick conversation beforehand and had some other information, there are plans to sort that, but also it would be really good if what the sort of information that's here could be put into some sort of tabular form so that you could look down and go, that programme, those beneficiaries, that, and just get that clarity quickly and easily.
Yeah, Councillor, as the paper kind of alludes to, the Shared Prosperity Fund has basically given us additional monies to bring everything together. So as you're probably aware, and I know it is confusing because there are lots of different programs out there, I would agree. The Workplace Plus element, which sits in environment, will be working more closely with us. I mean, we work in partnership with them anyway, but we'll have a sort of overarching situation where it'll be a holistic program. I think it says it in the report, but happy to put some table together which is easy enough for people to understand, because it's very complicated for people working in it as well, I think. So, and we are trying to look at a front door to make things really easy for people to understand. So when somebody comes through the door, they'll come to a triage position, which we've got already, but making it really simple for people to come in and they can be filtered to the correct people to be supported with, because as you know, it's, which category am I in, which age am I over in that postcode? It can be very complicated for us all, I think. So we're trying to make it as simple as possible, really, moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, much appreciated. Again, there's nothing worse than going round in circles with things and phoning all different departments. So thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Again, that report is for information. So we've noted that report. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you. Moving on with the agenda item 11, Margam Castle Cadw grant funding. A good news story. I believe we've got Elith Lewis here to present the report. Diolch. Oh no, she's not here. Oh. No? Okay. Andrew, do we know who's... Oh, okay. Yeah, if you could just bear with us while we just dial in one of the officers. Thank you. Okay, we're just going to move on with the agenda and we'll come back to that item, members, if that's okay. Apologies. Moving on to agenda item 12, Leisure Services Report. And Paul Walker, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. The report before members today is an update report outlining the timeline for the transfer of indoor leisure back into the local authority. Members will recall that the original timeline target date was 1st of April 2023. Due to the financial constraints within the authority, Chair, this has now been put back to April the 1st, 2024.
trade unions have been consulted, and the trade unions have actually had road shows last week going out to the staff to talk to the staff, and the staff are now fully aware of the new timeline. I'd like to acknowledge the work done by officers, Chair, who sit on the steering group. A lot of hard work has gone into preparing for the transfer, including 2P consultation with the staff. That work will continue. Chair, we're also working with Celtic on a financial model which will include energy conservation and income generation. So that's the basis of the report, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, diolch yn fawr. We've had a question come in from Councillor Angharad Aubrey.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just read out Councillor Aubrey's question as she's written it in the email. So she states, I wanted to have the finer details of how bringing the leisure services and facilities back in-house is going to work, as there is still a budget gap of £23,867 and an unfunded pay award. There is also the uplift to consider for the Fire and Rescue Authority, and are the saving solutions long-term and sustainable? She states, I read in the pre-consultation suggestions, but I don't think that they will all be considered, as some didn't seem realistic. If we could get an answer to that, please.
I suppose the answer to that is around the business plan, which Andrew has said is available. Obviously, within the budget proposals, we are increasing the amount of funding required to run leisure services because we know the amount in the budget's unsustainable. There's also savings targets in there, which, as Paul alluded to, will hopefully be achieved through additional income generation and energy efficiency measures. So I don't know if there's any more to say on that, really, Chair, if I'm perfectly honest. If Andrew wants to add anything or not.
Okay, thank you. I think maybe, Andrew, if we'll circulate that report, and if Councillor Aubrey has any questions, she can come back to you on that.
Yeah, and one thing, if you could get clarification, I don't recognise the figure of 20. You mentioned 23,000. Yeah,
I think she. A million. So, sorry, Chair. That's £23.867 million budget gap for next year before any savings. So I wish you were 23,000.
We both do. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Any other members have questions on this item, please? Councillor Reynolds, please.
I raised my issues and thank you for agreeing to share the business plan, and perhaps Councillor Aubrey could also have a copy of that. I just wondered, in reading through this, if there were any plans to make changes, and one of the high expenditures for Celtic Leisure, I have to make sure I don't say Celtic Energy, is the cost of some of the senior staff, and the high cost of those staff being out. And I wondered if there was any plans to do to bring things in and do things over time, and to make changes perhaps at that level in order to decrease the overall costs rather than actual operational staff. There are concerns. This committee in the past has had concerns about the management and the capabilities, and it would be good to know that there was going to be significant oversight and view. Thank you.
Chair, but clearly I'm not going to talk about individuals and individual circumstances. I'm pretty sure Councillor Reynolds wouldn't want me to do that anyway. The year that we're talking about, the year, if you like, transition period, will certainly give us an opportunity to have a much more in-depth and significant role, I suppose, in terms of how things operate. And that's by agreement, because, of course, Celtic Leisure will continue to operate as a separate company for another year, and as such, they have a legal standing. So all our influence will be by agreement rather than forcing upon them. And I've got no doubt whatsoever that the staff and the board will be happy with that direction travel, because they know what the end game is. In terms of the council providing services for Celtic, is that what your question was?
It
In the
was
interim?
concern about the management and the running of the business, really, and the level of oversight and how that might be managed. I think what I'm feeling for, if I get the wording right, is there, we may have a business plan, but is there a transition plan that can also, this committee ought to be able to scrutinise? Thank you.
Well, the business plan is the plan for leisure for next year and longer. So it's not just a 1-year plan. So obviously I've said that can be circulated. But of course, what's most important is how the business is driven, and I think that's what I'm getting at in terms of the council will have more influence over the next year than perhaps we've done in the past, and that's because of where we intend to end up in 12 months' time. But we've always got to respect the sort of the legal entity of Celtic Leisure, to be fair. So I do expect the council to be more involved, to have a more frequent, if you like, say in what happens in terms of the day-to-day running, and when things happen. And one of the reasons we're talking about delay, and we do save £1 million in rates and pension costs, and if you like, in some ways that's just fortuitous, but we also want to take the opportunity to drive the business and improve the business so that it's a much more sustainable business when we transfer it back in. So some of the things that Hugh spoke about earlier in terms of energy, investment, if whatever that audit throws up, we can hopefully invest and get those returns. But also just in terms of general improved performance around membership retention, practices, processes going on, marketing, sales, the whole sort of kit caboodle, really. So there's an opportunity during that year to re-energize some of those processes so that when we do take it back in-house, it's affordable and therefore sustainable. Because of course, one of the reasons that it's so expensive is that we're not suggesting that any one of those facilities should be closed, and that's not the case across Wales and England. That's not our stance. All the facilities are protected, all the jobs are protected. There is a cost to that, and we need to reduce those costs. And there's a number of ways of doing that through, income generation and cost reduction. So,
thank you. I see no other indications. This report is for information, therefore we note this report. We're going to jump back to agenda item 11 now, which is Margam Castle Cadw grant funding. And we've got Delyth Lewis on the call to speak, please.
Hi there.
Hi.
I'm sorry I wasn't in attendance earlier. I wasn't aware that I meant to attend or speak. So if you give me a guide on what you want me to speak about, that would help.
Yeah, no problem. So we'll assume that members have obviously read the report regarding the council's successful bid to Cadw for emergency works grant funding. I have had a question through from Councillor Neath and John, who sits on this committee but isn't able to make it today. I'll just read out his question for you, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I would like to see further detail regarding Margam Castle, or how they plan to make the most of the building after works have been complete.
Okay, well, this is an urgency works grant, so it's meant for making it watertight, consolidating any problems that the building has, rather than trying to find a use for it. It's really for repairs to the fabric of the building. So this money is, but we've already got a programme of works, which our team of architects and project managers have a rolling programme of capital works. And we were lucky enough to be able to secure 500,000 from Cadw to implement and deliver that element that we could bring forward to this financial year. So they are repairs to the finials, repairs to the tower, the external tower and the internal tower, and there's a leaking roof, as you know, in the staircase. So this is really repairs to the fabric of the building as opposed to looking for an alternate use. But it will free up some areas that are now fenced off with terrace fencing so the public can't access them. So it will open up some of the areas that are now not accessible.
That's great. Diolch am hwnna, Delyth. Thank you. Paul Walker, if we could bring you in at this point, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The long-term solution for the castle, we're on that at the moment, Chair. The manager of Margam Park, Mike Wynn, is working with an external consultant on a feasibility study for the park, which we will result in us putting in a Heritage Lottery grant application. This is moving along at pace. We're presently out for consultation. The chief executive, I believe, of Heritage Lottery Wales came down last week, and Andrew and I met with them in the Orangery to do a bit of schmoozing, I suppose. But we are hopefully going to have a project to go forward by June. It'll be 2 phases because we would require at least £10 million to make the Margam Castle a pleasant environment again, which could include catering, could include exhibition space, and will also include some form of accommodation, Chair. So it's ongoing, but this is going to be at least a 5-year project, Chair.
That's great. Yeah. Andrew, please.
Yeah, thank you. Paul's just mentioned the fact that the consultation is ongoing at the moment, Paul. Obviously, Councillor Golding's asked a question about what the end use of that facility might be, and basically that's what the consultation talks about. So I think maybe we need to make sure that that consultation document is circulated amongst members so that they can have their say, because quite clearly the if Heritage Lottery are going to give us £10 million over a period of time, they need to be satisfied that they're comfortable with what the direction of travel of the council is in terms of, because they have some very specific ideas about what they fund, which they kind of shared with us to a point last week. But members have a very important part to play in terms of determining what the end use is as well. So I think we need to make sure, and maybe Paul, if you can arrange through the Democratic Services that we get that consultation document out to members so they can have their say, or at least the opportunity to have their say.
That's great. Thank you. Councillor Matthew Crowley, please. Diolch.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well done, Delyth. Managed to get £500,000 out of Cadw. I would like to know how we've done it, because we've been trying for feasibility studies for 40, 50 years down the park to try and get money out of that lot. But fair play to you, that's excellent news. It's welcomed. And of course, you could shake a stick at 30 million to renovate that castle and you still would make an impact. I'm glad to hear that the heritage lotteries are finally warming, but as you say, Andrew, they're very specific in what they give the money for. So I suspect we won't have the consultation that we would like in terms of do what we like, because there will be specific criteria around how they fund it. But certainly that is great news for the castle. It's been standing like that since West Glamorgan took it over in 72, 74, and it's stood like that ever since. So obviously the new roof they put on in the early 70s has come 40 years full circle again, and we're back to square one. But at least the building's watertight, you got a chance. But that's great news, Delyth, and good on you for squeezing money out of them tight people up in Cadw. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr, Delyth, am ymuno gyda ni prynhawn yma. So that report is for information. Therefore, we note that good news report for a change, as I say. So there are no urgent items. So moving on with the supplementary item, which is agenda item 14. The report is part of the supplementary Cabinet Board agenda pack on pages 1 to 18. Hayley, would you like to add anything to the papers?
Nothing to add, only to give apologies for the late submission. It was due to Good news, Welsh Government give us some additional funding to expand on the work, which is really positive, but obviously putting our officers under pressure to put the report together, and we felt it was important for members to have an opportunity to scrutinise before we finalise the plan with Welsh Government. So thank you. And we've got officers here, sorry, we've got Lisa Clement-Jones, who wrote the report under a lot of pressure, and Sarah Griffiths, the coordinator, and we'll take any questions as happy to take. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Members have any questions on this item, please? Councillor Maisen, please.
Yes, diolch yn eidir. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to ask, on page 20, is the capital bill due in Carmarthen? Is that still on course to be completed by 2024? Because I know we were held up by Dŵr Cymru using it as a sort of a stockyard for a number of, well, about a year, was it? I just wonder if it's still on course to be completed by 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll pass your question to Lisa Clement-Jones. She'll be able to answer that for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Maisen. Yeah, I'm pleased to say still on course for March 2024. All the surveys to date are looking great, and we're looking forward to it being completed on time.
Lovely, thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Councillor Caroline Lewis, did you want to come in, or did you want to email officers with some questions that you have regarding flying start? No, there we go. Maybe contact officers directly then. Great. Just to advise members that the report is obviously for immediate implementation. The recommendations are listed on page 7 of the supplementary agenda pack. Can I please have a proposer and a seconder?
To propose, Chair.
Happy to propose. Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. Can members please indicate if they wish to abstain?
I see no abstentions, Chair.
Members, if you do not indicate to the contrary, then I will take it that this decision is supported to Cabinet Board. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
I can confirm, Chair, that the report and recommendation is supported to Cabinet Board.
Lovely, thank you. So working back to the scrutiny agenda, agenda item 6, forward work programme. This item is just for noting unless members have any comments. I see none. Agenda item 7, urgent items. I have none. And this now concludes the business for the Scrutiny Committee. Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd. Thank you very much.